Across the publishing industry, the debate about increasing diversity in fiction is now familiar to everyone. Yet there is a real dearth of practical advice on how issues such as stereotyping and cultural misappropriation might be tackled. With this work, I've tried to present some perspectives on these thorny topics. In this last video, I'd like to bring those thoughts together in the form of recommendations that speak to my initial proposition, namely that all authors should be allowed to write whatever they choose, including stories involving characters not from their own ethnic backgrounds, as long as they approach the subject with respect. The starting point for taking on the challenge of writing a character outside of your own culture is to be aware of the space you're taking up. What I mean by this is that if you are a writer with an established platform and you choose to explore a minority culture, then be aware of the fact that, historically, few voices from that culture have been published. You may find yourself criticized because of this, through no fault of your own. By reflecting in this way, you will, I hope, not be discouraged from writing your character, but rather be spurred on to put in the necessary effort to do justice to your characterization. As a first step, then, it is important to understand what you don't know. Without assessing the gaps in your knowledge, you can't target the research that you need to do to be able to understand the character you are trying to write. Part of this means asking yourself about your own biases. What have you imbibed about a particular culture that may skew your ability to write accurately about that culture? We're all guilty of this, no matter what our ethnic background. It's okay to admit that you won't truly be able to step into the shoes of, say, a Native American person if you're not Native American yourself. This leads on to carrying out the research and doing it well. Speaking to people from the community you're writing about is clearly important, but again, one individual is not representative of an entire culture. By speaking to multiple individuals from the community you're trying to write about, you will be in better shape to deliver a more accurate representation. Online community groups, for example on Facebook, are particularly useful in this respect, as well as reading books written by authors from that community. Ayo Onatade has been blogging, reviewing, and commentating on crime fiction for 25 years. Ayo is a black person of mixed ancestry, African and West Indian. If you're going to write a black person, she says, make sure you get the nuances right. For instance, African and West Indian people have different attitudes and will react differently in any given situation. One of the bugbears of many people who see their communities misrepresented in fiction is the use of stereotypes. But how do you know if the character you're creating is a stereotype? After all, some aspects of a culture are so common to that community that they will, inevitably, form a part of your character's makeup. A way of avoiding falling into the stereotype trap is to ask yourself some simple questions. Firstly, is the culture I'm writing about being depicted incorrectly? In other words, have you made factual mistakes? A simple example I often see is where the traditions of Muslims, Sikhs, and Hindus are treated as interchangeable. Though these communities share many commonalities, their religious customs are very different. Second, is your character being depicted in a way likely to create negative perceptions in the minds of readers? This is not to say that you can't write characters of colour that are negative, but merely that you should check that you're doing so because it is the central identity of that character, as opposed to suggesting that this is the core identity of the community that your character represents. Third, have you given your character personality traits that are deliberately exaggerated to create a particular emotional response? Examples of this might be the angry black woman or the nerdy Indian stereotype. Fourth, have you cherry-picked aspects of a culture and used them out of context just to titillate? And lastly, are you using ethnic dialect simply for the sake of it? One of the things that often jars for readers is a writer of one ethnicity writing swathes of dialogue in another culture's native patois. I get the same feeling when I watch non-Russian actors playing Russian characters with such a mangled accent that every line seems like a send-up. Remember, stereotypes have power and can shore up negative perceptions, justifying not only a continuing lack of equity in fiction, but also in day-to-day life. Empathy is another thing that is often talked about when it comes to writing diverse characters. But what is it exactly? For me, empathizing with another culture doesn't mean having to write characters that are always good or portrayed in a sympathetic light. Empathy doesn't mean that you can't poke fun at a culture. if you happen to be writing a satire or a comic work, for instance. Empathy is about being able to sympathize with the truth of a particular character's circumstances, which may be wrapped up in historical or social factors related to that culture. Another thing to ask yourself is whether your character has a genuine purpose within your plot, or are they simply there because you felt the need to put in a character of colour. It does no one any favours if characters pop up with no rhyme or reason for their existence. If a book genuinely demands an all-white cast or an all-black cast, then that is precisely what you should write. One simple thing that all authors can do when writing characters outside of their own experience is cultural consultation, which is just a fancy way of saying user sensitivity reader. This can be as simple as asking a couple of friends from the same background as your character to read your work. But friends are not professionals. A better bet is to use a paid sensitivity reader. Your aim is to ensure, as far as possible, that you haven't employed insensitive language, cultural inaccuracies, or bias. A sensitivity reader can also help with voice, especially important for first-person narratives. Alison Flood writes about literature for The Guardian. She believes that authors shouldn't be frightened when writing across cultures, saying, "The job of an author, after all, is to imagine themselves into the skin of others. But that this needs to be done in a thoughtful, well-researched, careful way." She points to the increasing prevalence of sensitivity readers in ensuring that mistakes are minimized. For her, what matters is whether the tone of a work is jarring, and whether the author has done the work to understand the culture they are writing about. Good research, combined with sensitivity readers, can help minimize such issues. I'd like to conclude now by drawing together the threads of our argument. The truth is that we live in a world where the line between what will or will not cause offence is often blurred. Nevertheless, I believe that authors who approach the business of writing characters outside of their own ethnicity with the right attitude, and following some of the advice I've tried to distill into this guidance, will be well placed to make a good stab at it. We must be mindful always of the fact that minority voices are still few and far between, and until that changes, there will always be criticism of mainstream authors who choose to write characters of a minority culture. That's why it's so important for the industry to respond by publishing and promoting different voices, and for readers to respond by buying such books. Jake Kerridge has been a national literary critic for almost 2 decades. He says, "Cultural appropriation becomes a real problem if the only perspective that reading audiences have on other cultures comes from books written by those not from that culture." He says that this is a problem within the industry, one he'd like to see rectified with a wider range of voices being published. He also asks the intriguing question, how important is authenticity? What he means is that sometimes a small measure of authenticity can be sacrificed in the interest of a story that showcases culturally diverse ingredients. Many commentators are increasingly realizing that trying to stop authors writing across cultures by vilifying them, especially on social media, can create a culture of self-censorship, where authors simply become too afraid of writing anything outside of their own race. In a 2020 article discussing literary appropriation, Australian journalist Alex Turner Cohen suggests that as a consequence of such fears, diverse characters are becoming less prevalent in literature. The criticisms aimed at the publishing industry in recent years are familiar to most of us. Over the course of these videos, we've taken a good look at those failings. My own personality isn't geared towards laying blame. Instead, I think we should look forward and seek practical solutions to the problem. I believe those solutions can only come via a coordinated effort involving all those with an interest in creating a sustainable, vibrant, and equitable publishing industry. This project is my way of bringing that literary community together. My belief is that the industry, and that includes readers, is made up largely of good people seeking to do the right thing. I believe that change is uppermost in the minds of industry gatekeepers and those who make the decisions as to which books are published and how they are sold. One way to accelerate change is to provide more tangible evidence to the industry that promoting books featuring diverse characters makes business sense. And that means readers voting with their feet. If more readers make it clear that they are willing to take risks with their reading choices, the more willing publishers are to cater to that demand by publishing a wider range of books. Clearly there is a chicken and egg scenario here, but I honestly believe that both sides can add positively to the equation. Authors too can play their part by taking risks. No one is suggesting that every author should ditch the characters they want to write or the characters that have made them successful in favour of writing characters of colour. That's not what this project is about. If you are a white author with a wonderful story to tell featuring white characters, then that is exactly the book you should write, and exactly the book that should be published and read. Ditto if you are an author of colour writing characters of colour. But what I think we can all consider, without being prescriptive, is a world where more authors choose to broaden their horizons, where more authors take the risk of introducing characters that are ethnically diverse and still relevant to their story. If this happened more frequently, then over time we would see a more representative cast populating the vast number of books published each year. Influencers too have a part to play here. Barry Forshaw is one of the UK's most experienced crime fiction critics and historians. Barry tells me that in one sense, the gatekeepers are now being gate-kept. By this he means that diversity is an issue all book reviewers are embracing, though quality will always remain paramount. His feeling is that every writer must have the license to become whoever it is they are writing. Mark Sanderson has been a literary reviewer for almost 4 decades and currently reviews for The Times. He feels that the act of writing demands that authors place themselves into the minds of each of their characters, and that exercising emotional empathy is the best way to do justice to any depiction of a particular identity. He also suggests that if a book is good, most readers will be willing to forgive 1 or 2 false notes. Book blogging is an increasingly important phenomenon in the publishing industry. Tracy Fenton runs The Book Club, TBC, an influential private Facebook book group with some 13,000 members. She reveals that in her estimation, less than 10% of her members are from non-white backgrounds. Nevertheless, after the Black Lives Matter summer, there was a robust discussion within TBC, touched off by a single white reader asking for recommendations of books written by black authors. Hundreds of books were recommended, and others pledged to read more such stories. My final message is to readers. So much of this rests on your shoulders. If you choose to read books written by authors of colour, or books featuring characters showcasing a range of ethnicities, the industry will soon take note. Part of this is about examining your own unconscious bias. Part of it is simply not judging a book based on the disparity between an author's identity and the identity of the characters in the book. When I feature a white character in my books, as I have done and continue to do, I would certainly hope that readers can judge that character on its merits, rather than prejudging my ability to write about white people because I myself am not white. The truth is that books are subjective. They are personal to both author and reader. They evoke emotions in us. The best books evoke the strongest emotions. I am, first and foremost, a reader. As a reader, I want to be challenged, excited, intrigued, mystified, and titillated. I can honestly say that I have never felt more hopeful about the future of the industry. If you found these videos useful, feel free to alert others to this project and to download the written guide that accompanies the series from my website. I would also be extremely grateful if you could spend just 3 minutes filling out the short feedback survey available on my website at vasimkhan.com, where you will also find further resources.